Hey there, YouTube. I'm Kitsu. This is the Kitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Sins of a Solar Empire 2. So today we're going to be talking a bit about the Percheron carrier cruiser, and I'm just going to preface this by saying that carriers currently are not in a very good spot. The whole rebalance that happened with the last sort of DLC completely reworked the missile point defense dynamic and made it so that not only are point defenses on average a little bit better and substantially better for the Vasari. They're about the same for tech, but overall, point defense has gotten stronger to counteract the new mechanics for the missiles. But they haven't done anything to boost carriers, which means that the things that were countering them beforehand and making them actually fairly situational, because carriers were pretty situational to begin with in the previous iteration of the game. They're now just flatly bad because they're too easily countered by too many different things, and the situations where they're good, there just are too few of those. The rebalancing on durability also didn't really do them any good favors, and same with the increase on Pierce that you saw on the frigates. So carriers just in general are pretty bad right now, but we'll still go over the Percheron carrier cruiser. So carriers not really known for having anything to go for as weapons or abilities. This thing's got 200 durability, 790 armor points, 1,350 hull points, and 2 squadrons. Hidden statistics, armor strength 25, and 650 maximum speed. So obviously that's not that important. Ideally speaking, like your carriers should not be getting shot at. The important thing is their ability to use their squadrons as their main thing there. Things to note, 200 durability does put them exactly in the strike zone for frigates, like I mentioned sort of earlier. They're very easy to hunt down and kill with those sorts of ships, and their very low speed makes them even easier to hunt down and kill. So they're not really that good into light ships. They'll probably get torn apart by most of those out there. And there's not really a ton of ships in general that they can run away from, but if they've got a good lead, they can at least keep some distance, kite for a little while. But 650 speed is really, really slow. So not really good stats as far as the actual chassis goes, but it's kind of fine assuming that these were actually any good. So technically speaking, their fighters are tied for the highest damage per second, but in reality, they're second place. The durability at 0, armor points 31, hull points of 25. Squadron of 6 means that these guys are actually the most fragile out of all the fighters, strangely enough. The damage per second is 4 with 100 Pierce, and they've got that on 1 attack there. Hidden statistics, they've got an armor strength of 25, 1,500 maximum speed. The 6-man squad means that they've got 24 damage per second. This is actually still pretty good damage per second against later targets and against enemy strike craft as well. It's not, like I said, the best. They're a little bit behind Vasari, but they're close to doing well against most other fighters out there. The reason that Vasari technically have better is that their fighter has 24 damage per second base, but they've got much better upgrade paths from their research. So you're typically going to see much higher damage values off of the Vasari fighters. For their bombers, we're looking at something pretty similar here. They got a durability of 0, armor points 52, hull points 40, and they've got a single light missile at 6 damage per second with 300 Pierce. Hidden statistic, armor 25, 900 maximum speed. Unlike with the fighters, the 24 damage per second from the 4 bombers here is actually the highest damage per second by a pretty high margin out of all the bombers in the game. There are some weaknesses to the tech bombers, namely that they do fire a light missile, and that does mean that the missile themselves can be shot down by point defense, and it means that they're doubly weak against the flak burst defense. However, the damage is high enough that there are still utility to the bombers for the tech faction. I still wouldn't really say that they're great, but they are definitely something that can do a good amount of damage. But like I said, though, I would not recommend taking these even for that purpose. Pierce 300 on the single light missile is also doing no favors here. You're doing 2 damage per second per squadron, or a total of 8 damage per second for the whole squad with against capital ships, which is really, really bad. That's not enough damage to really justify the cost that you're paying here. Now, in terms of cost, these guys are paying kind of a cheap amount of stuff per squadron. You're looking at 14 supply or 7 per squadron. Their price is 715 credits, 210 metal, and then 115 crystal. The total price is in some ways cheaper than the Aria drone host per squadron. However, given how easily the Advent are capable of getting crystals, the way I personally would sort of view this is that you are paying more per squadron for the Percheron than you are for the area drone host. And it really comes down to how you interpret the cost of different resources, because there's different credit conversions that get used based on different scenarios and different math, and I don't really have a firm way of saying one way or the other which one you're supposed to use. My view is that it's easier to mass area drone hosts than it is Percheron carriers by a little bit there. Now, this cost is, for like 2 squadrons, not terrible. The problem, again, is that your squadrons are going to be getting shot down really, really quickly, which means that there's not really much purpose to this, because the squadrons being alive is the only functional reason you would have these. And the damage on this isn't so ridiculously high, even though it looks like it is, like 48 damage per second on the bombers, 48 damage per second on the fighters. That sounds really, really good for what you're paying. It's not quite enough to deal with the fact that you're actually going to drop down really, really quickly because all your strike craft are going to get killed, but also the damage numbers are assuming that your strike craft are firing at exactly the interval where their attacks are off cooldown, but because of the way that they fly around in loops, they actually miss that timing about half the time, to the point where they'll sometimes fire off target, or they'll fire at like a missile because fighters are capable of firing at missiles, or they'll just not fire at anything for a long time and then loop around and then get back on target. So their damage per second can actually drop from what is listed to a much, much, much lower number. And the result of that can mean that you're not really doing as much damage as you'd like to be doing per second there. Now, the inefficiency paired with these things all dying is what makes this really, really difficult to justify. But in the event that you are capable of keeping all your bombers alive or all your fighters alive, this is still a really good amount of damage. So if your opponent is taking absolutely no counter to fighters, then this can be quite good. It's just that it's not too difficult to tech into taking something that's capable of doing a little bit against these if your opponent has to. The closest currently to a clean opponent for this is actually the Advent. The problem is, like I said, I do think that their fighters are a little bit more cost effective, and the Halcyon is really, really good. So you're going to typically see them capable of countering your strike craft, even if you mass a whole bunch of Percherons, by just going for a smaller number of carriers more efficiently, and the Halcyon, and you'll basically lose all your fighters, and then you'll lose the fight, and they'll just sort of kill all your carriers. So it's not really a great choice even in that match right now. Against tech, your bombers do nothing because they're capable of using flak barrage against those. They've got the Guard of Flak Frigate, which is one of the best, most cost-efficient flak systems in the game, and they added the Warden for Visari, which is a very good anti-fighter type of point defense unit, so it's much easier for them to go against fighters and bombers, whereas before they actually were a little bit weak to that, because if you had a whole bunch of fighters, you could actually kill the defensors with that pretty easily and pretty efficiently. Now that they can rely on the Warden, which is much harder to kill with fighters, it's not as clean of a thing for you to be able to do. So anyway, let's take a look at the upgrades you can get for these guys. No unique tech for these guys, and I think this is where you got space to play with the carriers for both the Advent and the tech faction. I do think that the Visari one already has enough perks to it that I would not add anything to those guys. But adding a unique ability for these guys might make them capable of doing something a little bit more interesting. For the fighters, you're looking at the gun upgrades here, the autocannons. You've got up to the refined propellants. This is where the Visari pull ahead because their tech for their fighters are better. However, you do get up to 35% on the refined propellants. Compared to Advent at the same point in time, you're looking at 35% compared to their 36%. The problem is that Advent are looking at their 34% back when you're at 25%, so they get ahead in terms of percent upgrade, but their base values are lower by enough that you'll still be a little tiny bit ahead of them, but not very much. By contrast, Visari are going to be way ahead of you at this point in time. For the bombers, you're looking at the missile upgrades, and you don't get the first one until refined missile avionics. Still, even though you're really behind on missile tech compared to the beam tech for the Advent or the missile tech for the Visari, you're still capable of out-damaging both of them in terms of raw numbers throughout the entire sort of process. So it doesn't matter so much that you're getting access to refined missile avionics really, really late. And of course, you do get up to plus 30%, which is enough to make it so that you're doing quite a lot of damage. Things that I have not been able to really figure out if they have an impact are the extended range missiles. which theoretically might make it so that your bombers are on interval more frequently because they buzz around the target and get off distance and then back in distance. Extended range missiles might make it so that they're capable of firing more frequently, making it so that they miss less of their damage. So that might do something, but I haven't really noticed a huge impact from that. Same thing for the armored missiles. This makes it so that the missiles survive more shots. I haven't noticed them surviving much more point defense, but it's really hard to tell when tracking that specific sort of interaction there, so it might not actually make a difference there. However, they do apply to these missiles as best as I can tell. Outside of that, though, you've of course got the advanced metallurgy, titanoferric plating, repellent, premium armor. Because you're getting shot at by such a restricted number of types of weapons and they all do fairly low damage, the armor is actually pretty good. You have got armor on your fighters and your bombers. This does make it so that they take less damage from each hit from those point defense guns, and reducing the damage that you're taking from those does make a bit of a difference, even though your base armor values are really low. It's not going to make a gigantic one, but it does make it so that your ships are a little bit more likely to survive, and of course it also helps your carrier survive. The hull reinforcements, again, these make it so that your ships are capable of surviving a little bit more damage, and of course your carrier as well, making it so they're a little bit more likely to get out of the fight alive. Again, low base values for the fighters means that the expert damage control is not actually adding that much in terms of hit points, but since they're getting hit by smaller attacks by smaller vessels and they're immune to the really big, heavy, scary attacks, it kind of makes it so that this is basically fine. Unfortunately, there's no upgrade to put shields onto your fighter craft, which would be very, very strong and probably make them a little bit too powerful compared to Advent. But it would put them more on par with Vasari, in my opinion. The carrier, on the other hand, can get the cruiser shield refit, which would only give it a 750 shield point boost. This isn't terrible. This is not that bad, but it's not like an amazing thing to have because, again, the ship does get hunted down pretty quickly. The 750 will keep it alive a little bit longer, it'll mean that those ships have to take longer to go through the whole lot of them, but they're not supposed to be tanking shots. They're supposed to be out in the back. Hopefully you position them in a way that this is not going to matter, but it can help you out in those situations. Same thing for the improved shield arrays and the superior shield emitters. These are going to make it so that your ships just can survive that tiny little bit, but they're not really that important for this particular class of vessel. For the civilian stuff, we're looking again at things like counter-deployment, the labor negotiations, industrial complex, and the industrial juggernaut. However, I find that for things like carriers, you're not typically super constrained by build speed. It's more that they cost a lot of resources, so you're more often constrained by those. Especially if you are going to go for a carrier build. I don't think that you go for one currently, but in the previous way that I would do this is I would get a whole bunch of garrison, and I would get the cruiser thing, and I would only get carriers unlocked. And by not unlocking the other cruisers, this means that every system would have like 500 supply worth of just carriers. And you could sort of have that set up alongside a whole bunch of the carrier hangar defenses. And unlike for every other faction, you can actually get really far into the game with this faction with just like a mix of Caleb's and a mix of the Guard of Flak frigates and a mix of the Cobalt Light frigates. And those three are capable of dealing with like most of the different types of units that are in the game. And then, of course, you've got your capital ships. So you don't need to have a whole bunch of cruisers for your main sort of death ball. And what this lets you do is have 500 or even 1,000, because typically when you're actually in the game, I usually go by the mid-tier techs. But you can combine multiple planets together on a frontline planet and have like 500 supply worth of carriers in a single system, plus all the hangar bays, plus like an Argonov. And all of those together would provide a humongous amount of defense for basically free. You'd have to pay for the Argonov, obviously, but the garrisons, they just sort of like replenish there. And this would just provide you with a humongous amount of stuff that the enemy would have to take a lot of point defense for if they wanted to attack that sort of area. If they don't have that, then the bombers would just annihilate them over time. And what you can do is, like, if they've got a whole bunch of point defense, you can sort of swoop in with your big navy full of the Calebs and the Gardas and the Cobalts and the capital ships, which don't care about the point defense. So they've wasted all that effort in getting all that point defense so they can siege your planets just to get wiped by your fleet, which is not relying on those things at all. This, again, I don't think really works anymore because the point defense is so much stronger than it used to be that a smaller amount is capable of wiping out your entire contingent of bombers and stuff like that. So you'll still have to win the fight in an honest way otherwise. But yeah, that's an option. I think that's something that you could consider, but I don't think that's really on the table under the current meta. Anyway, in addition to that, you do have access to the speed boost. The thing I like about this is it does let you hypothetically keep your carriers a little bit safer than they would otherwise be, but it's not a tremendously good bonus because you're probably still going to get caught. They're still pretty slow even with that. The fighters and bombers also are fast enough that they don't really need a speed bonus. They'll usually catch up to their targets just because of the way that the game's like turning and stuff like that works. So that's pretty much everything about these guys. The one last thing to mention, there is another upgrade here for the tech primacy. Those guys have another 10% damage that they can get to the fighters, but it's not really that big of a bonus in all honesty. By that point in the game, the fighters have really been outscaled and outclassed, so not really a bonus that's for them. Still, though, if you want to take it for that, then that is something you can definitely do. So yeah, this is a unit that I like. I like taking carriers. However, I do not think that they're currently in a very good place. I think they need a bit of a rebalance hit. Same with how the missiles got rebalanced. The thing that I personally would do for the what I would kind of like to see is like a unique tech for each of the two factions that do not have sort of like a ridiculous fighter with a carrier that's already got a weapon on it. Like, Visari don't need a unique bonus because they've got phase missiles for the bombers. They've already got a unique tech to them. Their fighters are by far the strongest in the game by a humongous margin on the faction that's not even supposed to have them. And they've got point defense cannons on the carrier itself. So they've got, like, 3 different things already going for them. But what I would like to see is like a unique bonus, like an elite flight school, for example, for the Percheron carrier cruiser, where the fighters and the bombers have like a % chance of evading attacks, so that it sort of keeps them alive for longer, making it so that they're less likely to get killed. I would like to see all of the fighters and the bombers lose the experience points gain, because right now you can kill a fighter and get like, I think it's 4 experience points, then 6 for a bomber or something like that, which I don't think that you should get. I think you should get no experience points for killing any of the strike craft, because right now you just sort of mill through them and gain tons and tons of experience points. So I think that something like that for the Percheron would be good and on theme for the tech faction. I think that they'd be the ones who would sort of rely on that. Like you could give them like the Top Gun flight school or something like that. I think that would be kind of interesting. Might be hard to code in. You might have to do something else, but I'm not really sure what you would do otherwise. But in any event, yeah, that's kind of what I think needs to be done. It's just some sort of overhaul to the carriers to match what happened with the missiles. In any event, though, that's everything for today. Hope you found this one enjoyable. And of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.